Hello and good morning. Welcome to the State Minimum Standards 101 training. My name is Cordero. I'm going to be helping moderate this session today. This is an introductory course that will provide fundamental information on the application of state minimum standards to solid waste operations and facilities. Our speaker today is Carly Bartlett, who is an environmental scientist in the Training Support Services Unit at CalRecycle. We also have Randy Friedlander, Supervisor of CalRecycle's Inspection and Enforcement Agency Compliance Unit A. He will be our subject matter expert and will be available to answer questions at the end of this presentation. And let's begin with Carly.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Oh goodness, here we go. My screen already disappeared. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Okay, so housekeeping items. So if you haven't done so already, if you could change your name in Zoom so it's your full name and your organization. We're asking this just so that we are able to track for CEU purposes and get you your CEU credits if you'd like those. If you need help renaming yourself, if you click on the participants icon in your toolbar, it should give you a pop-up of all the participants. Click on your name. There's a little ellipses option on the right-hand side of the screen, and that should give you the option to rename. And then I did mention our EHS credits. We will be issuing 3 credits for the training today. To receive the credits, make sure you complete the evaluation, and we'll post the link to the evaluation in the chat at the end of the training today. And then we also will be emailing that link along with some resources, including the PowerPoint and some additional documents for you. So the training is being recorded today. We'll be cutting out some of the activities, but we are going to make the recording available at a later date for folks that weren't able to join in person. So that will be available, and we'll let you all know when that's ready to go. So Cordero, if you haven't already, if you go ahead and post the PowerPoint and the 2 resource documents in the chat, we'll get those for you if you'd like to take notes. And then some expectations for today. If you'd like to come on mic at any point, go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and let you unmute to ask your question or make your comment. We are going to have a lot of breakout rooms today and activities, so you're always welcome to come on camera. And then at any point, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll probably have to save questions for the end of the training today, but if you have a question, feel free to post it at any time, and we'll record those and make sure they're available for our subject matter experts. So before we get into content, I do have one poll I wanted to throw out there for you, and the question for that poll is, how long have you been in the solid waste field? And I'm anticipating most of you are going to be on the newer side, just based on the fact that most of you are here to learn today. But we always appreciate our veterans, especially because we will be doing a lot of activities. There's a lot of opportunity for discussion, and your expertise is always greatly appreciated. So we love to have our veterans here, but I am seeing that most of the folks here have been here for less than a year or between 1 to 4 years. So we're looking at the majority of folks being here for less than 5 years. And we do have a good number of 5 to 10 years and more than 10 years. So thank you for all who are joining us again. So we'll go ahead and jump over to some content here. As far as what we're going to be covering today, we'll be talking about what are state minimum standards, what's their purpose and the intent. We'll talk about identifying state minimum standard regulations and understanding common state minimum standards and recognize what to look for during inspections to assess compliance with those standards. We'll talk a little bit about enforcement, and we'll also do a couple activities, one of which is a final activity where you're going to be assessing compliance with standards during a practice inspection scenario. So let's go ahead and jump in. So let's start off with the basics. What are state minimum standards? State minimum standards are regulations that set out the minimum requirements for the design and operation of solid waste facilities. And the purpose of these regulations is to protect public health and the environment. State minimum standards provide a consistent and comprehensive structure for the design and operation of solid waste operations and facilities. State minimum standards are tailored for each type of solid waste operation or facility, and they're defined in California Code of Regulations, or CCR, Titles 14 and 27. So Title 27 contains the current regulations of CalRecycle and the State Water Resources Control Board pertaining to waste disposal on land. And Title 14 contains the current CalRecycle regulations pertaining to all other non-hazardous waste management in California. You can find the links to the regulations on CalRecycle's website, and there are two versions available. We have the web version, which will link you to Westlaw, and there's also an unofficial PDF of the regulations as well. So we'll be dropping these links in the chat, and I recommend that you go ahead and click on those links, and if you haven't done so already, bookmark those because they are useful, for inspection purposes, but we will be using them today as well during this training. I'm finding that most folks are preferring the PDF version for the training today, just because it does give you the option to search for specific terms or section numbers. So if you want to have those open, that would probably help you out later on, but we will be posting those links in the chat again later if you do lose those. So as you look through these titles 14 and 27, you might notice that the regulations may include the acronym CIWMB. So regulations that were approved before 2010 refer to CIWMB, which was CalRecycle's predecessor. And the regulations that were created after January 2010 refer to CalRecycle, but all regulations are in effect unless they're noted as repealed. All right, so I've got a quick little video here for you, which might help you with the PDF as far as how to navigate it and how to use it, tips and tricks. So I'm gonna go ahead and play this for you here. 1 second here. That keeps happening. Keep losing my PowerPoint. All right, here we go.
In this video, I will demonstrate a few tips and tricks when using the unofficial PDFs of Titles 14 and 27. Let's open the PDF for Title 14. You should have a toolbar on the top of the screen that will allow you to navigate through the PDF. Here's your toolbar here, the top of the screen. And we will go over some useful features of the PDF. If you scroll down to page 3, you will see that there's a table of contents for the document. So scroll down, so there's page 1, 2, and 3. So here's our table of contents, and it lists all the divisions, chapters, and sections of Title 14. A useful feature of the table of contents is that if you click on a page number, then it will bring you to that page of the document. So I'll show you how that works. First, we are going to jump down to page 12. You can either type 12 in the page number box here, or you can use the page up or page down arrows. So for now, let's type in 12, hit enter. And this brings us down to page 12, which is Article 6, Transfer Processing Operations and Facilities Regulatory Requirements. So let's scroll down one more page to page 13. This time I'm going to use the page down button. And here we have section 17408.1 litter control. And this is on page 198. So if I want to navigate to this section, I click 198. And here we have litter control requirements for transfer processing operations and facilities. Another useful feature is the Find tool. You can use this tool to search for keywords, phrases, and section numbers. The Find tool is the magnifying glass on the toolbar. So here's the Find tool, and if you click on it, then a search box will appear on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can use this to enter your search term. You can also search for terms by right-clicking anywhere in the document and selecting Find. Let's say we want to search for the term odor. When we enter our search term, you may notice that a list of suggestions appears. We can search for the term odor, which is found in the document 118 times, odors, which is found in the document 15 times, or odor impacts, which is found once. Let's go ahead and search for odor. You can click Next and Previous to cycle through the different places that the term odor appears in the document. Do take note that when you use the Find tool, the search will begin on the page you are currently on. So if we search while on page 1, it is likely that the search will bring us to the table of contents. However, if you search while on page 100, then the search may begin in the middle of the document. These basics should help you to quickly find regulations. I recommend saving the PDFs for titles 14 and 27 for easy access.
Alrighty, hopefully that helps you a little bit if you're not too familiar with those PDFs. All right. So statement of standards are either performance standards or prescriptive standards. And performance standards set out expectations and allow for different methods to meet those expectations. So these standards require mitigation measures that minimize impacts, are maintained, and allow for ongoing controls. And when assessing for performance standards, the EA or you will determine if the mitigation measures that are deployed are adequate to protect public health and safety in the environment. And then for prescriptive standards, these include specific procedures, criteria, or thresholds. And if observations show that the deployed measures and the results of those measures are not consistent with the standards, then a finding of non-compliance can be supported. So prescriptive standards are pretty cut and dry, where it's specific thresholds given. If it's not met, then it's not in compliance. Whereas performance standards offer a little bit more flexibility there as far as methods to control or minimize, etc. Some standards do have a combination of prescriptive and performance elements. So it's important to read those standards carefully and look for keywords to ensure that those operations and facilities are meeting all aspects of the standard. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our first annotate activity for the training today. So you may hopefully see a annotate toolbar on the left-hand side of your screen. If not, you might have a little green circle with a pencil on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you click that, that should open up the toolbar for you. And if you're not seeing this, don't worry, you can go ahead and type your answers in the chat. We'll be able to see it there too. And then to text annotate on the screen, go ahead and click on the T for text on the toolbar, and then you can click anywhere on the screen and type in your response. Again, if this isn't working, feel free to use the chat. So the question here is, what are some examples of prescriptive standards? So thinking to your inspections and to the regulations, what are some prescriptive standards that might come to mind? And you don't need to worry about specific section numbers or anything. You can just type in physical contaminant limits or etc. I'm not going to give them away just yet. See if we can think of any. So what are some examples of prescriptive standards? So again, these are the ones that are specific limits or thresholds. If a facility is meeting this, then they're good. But if it's surpassing that threshold, then non-compliance can be supported. So I'm seeing on the screen, we have methane concentrations, gas concentrations. Yeah, so we'll be talking about that for landfills later on, what those concentrations are. Any other thoughts? Trying to think of what else we have. There's definitely a lot in the composting portions of the regulation. Yeah, tonnage received tonnage, definitely one. Maybe it wasn't chat real fast. Tons received per day. Soil cover, yeah, specific depths for soil cover, for daily cover, intermediate cover, feedstock limitations. Yep. Great, perfect. Yeah, so those are all examples where we have specific numbers or quantities associated with those standards. Signage, yeah, so signage is not one that requires numbers, but it requires specific, categories to be listed on the sign. So we will be talking about that one. Great. Cordero, if you can go ahead and clear the slide for me, we'll do one more. So we talked about the prescriptive standards and using keywords to help identify these prescriptive standards. So can we think of any keywords that might indicate performance standards? So again, these are ones where the standard itself may just state, I'll give you one here, but minimize odors, or minimize vectors, or minimize litter control, litter. What are those keywords that you might want to look for? Where, again, it's not a specific prescribed method to meet the standard. There's opportunity for an operator to implement different strategies to meet those standards. So what are some keywords that indicate performance standards? So odor is one, but what's the keyword within that regulation that might indicate that that is a performance standard? Discourage, I'm seeing discourage. Prevent, maintain, yes, absolutely. Monitor, limit, yeah, absolutely, perfect, yeah. So these are all keywords where it's not saying specifically the operator must, you know, limit the number of, well, that one's not going to work. Let me think of another one. You know, it's for, let's say for like litter control. So the operator must control or limit litter, right? It's not saying that they must implement, you know, folks to go out and pick up garbage by hand or trash by hand, right? It's just saying that they must limit it or must control it. I saw a couple others show up here. Report, cease, discontinue. I think we said that one already. So yeah, regulate. Yeah, perfect. Great. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And we will be talking about specific standards in more detail here. Cordero, if you want to go ahead and clear the slide. Perfect. So now that we're a little bit more familiar with prescriptive and performance standards, let's talk about the intent of the state minimum standards and implementation. So for performance standards, Title 14, Section 17204 references the intent of state minimum standards. And the gist of this regulation is that operators will describe how they intend to meet the performance requirement expectations in their operating documents, which are reviewed and approved by you, the EA. Wherever possible, operators may permit flexibility in meeting the objectives set by the standards, but you will ultimately either accept or reject the operator's proposal. So here's some of the operating documents, or here are the operating documents that are required for each type of solid waste site. Operators of landfills are required to have either a report of disposal site information or an RDSI, or a joint technical document or a JTD. Transfer processing sites are required to have a transfer processing report or a TPR for fully permanent sites, and a transfer processing facility plan for registration tier sites. Operators of compost facilities are required to have a report of composting site information or an RCSI, as well as an odor impact minimization plan or an OIMP. And then lastly, in-vessel digestion sites, operators are required to have an in-vessel digestion report for fully permitted sites and an in-vessel digestion facility plan for registration tier sites. It is important to keep these documents on hand as you inspect a facility or an operation, so you can reference them during your inspection to determine, one, if the measures that are described in those operating documents are being implemented, but also if they're effective. So now we'll talk a little bit more about implementation of state minimum standards. So for prescriptive standards, the operator may request alternatives to the specific requirements in the standard. However, the operator's proposal needs to be at least as effective as the requirements prescribed in the regulations. So here are some examples of sections that allow for EA approval of alternatives. For transfer processing, composting, and in-vessel digestion sites, there are some sections referencing alternatives to measurement protocols. And then for compostable materials, the section here is referencing an approval of alternatives. These links are clickable in the PDF that we posted in the chat earlier of the PowerPoint, and we will be sending this out, the PDF of the PowerPoint, in the email that will be sent out after the training, as well as the resource document. So you will be able to access these. So another tool for implementation are permit terms and conditions. So permit terms and conditions allow you to impose requirements that are deemed necessary to protect public health and safety in the environment. The terms and conditions may specify design features or methods, procedures that are more stringent than the state minimum standards. So when considering what kind of conditions may be appropriate, you can consider unique design or operations proposed for the site and any past enforcement issues. So it's good to keep these things in mind. And this is definitely a useful tool for imposing more stringent procedures or methods, et cetera, than what is required in regulation. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into our first breakout room discussion activity here, now that we've covered some of the basics on state minimum standards. So we're going to give you an opportunity to talk about your experiences enforcing state minimum standards. So you're going to be joining your breakout room. Momentarily here, Cordero is going to be opening the rooms. You should get a prompt to join your room once we finish this slide here. Once you get there, I'm going to still be sharing my screen, so you'll have all of the prompts and questions available to you. But first, you'll go ahead and say hello, introduce yourselves, and then you're going to need to choose a facilitator. And this person's just going to be helping to move discussion along and keep things on time. All of the slides are timed, so it should be pretty straightforward for you. And the facilitator is going to be the person who has been with their agency the longest. And then, as I've mentioned, once you're in your room, you're just going to follow the on-screen prompts. So we have, I think, 4 questions for you. It would be about 13 minutes total. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and have Cordero open up the breakout rooms. You should be seeing a prompt to join your room. So go ahead and do that, and we will see you back here in about 12 to 13 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. It looks like we should have everybody back in the main training room here. So thanks for having your conversations in your breakout rooms. Hoping you were able to take away some helpful information. But go ahead, let's do a quick type in the chat before we move on. What was your biggest takeaway from your discussion? And as a reminder, here were some of the questions that you guys discussed in your groups. What state minimum standard do you find most compliant most often? What is your biggest challenge in enforcing state minimum standards? And how have you addressed those challenges? So what was your biggest takeaway? Or something that stood out in your mind? CowerCycle may have funding to help legacy sites to comply. I actually don't know if that is true or not, but we could definitely save that for the Q&A. I believe that is true, but I don't want to say for sure because I don't know for sure. But yeah, let's save that one, Cordero, for the Q&A. SB 1383, yeah, that one's tricky. It's newer. That's obviously going to be a big factor into it being a challenge, right? Let's see. And then also with 1383, there's a lot of components of 1383, right? So we're not going to dive into 1383 too much, but we do have some trainings available, and I'll share those links here later, directing you to those links. But we'll talk a little bit about record keeping requirements very briefly. We also have that record keeping resource document available for you. Welcome, Mark. No worries. I'm glad you're able to join us. Any other take home or take away messages? Thanks, Julian. So Julian did post the link to the disposal and co-disposal site cleanup program. So that will bring you to that website on CowerCycle's main page. And
yeah, and we can talk more about it later if they have questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, we'll definitely save that question. But if, in the meantime, if you'd like to look into that some more, there's a link for you there. All right, great. So yeah, so in previous trainings, I think one of the biggest challenges for a lot of folks was basically like communication was a big theme that came up. You know, communicating with your operators, communicating to make sure that one, you're on the same page as far as what's required for a standard. And then communication obviously is going to be huge, because that's going to be one, your key to education as far as what's required of the operator, and then two, working towards compliance, right? So that was a big theme that we've seen a lot in some of the previous trainings as well. So perfect, thank you all. All right, so let's dive into some more content here as soon as I can figure out why my screen keeps disappearing from me. I don't know why this keeps happening. There we go. Okay, so let's review some solid waste facility types and regulations that apply to each facility or operation. So for this training, we're going to be focusing on disposal sites, transfer processing sites, compostable materials handling sites, and in-vessel digestion sites. And although there's only a few types of disposal sites, we're only going to be focusing on active landfills today, which I'm sure all of you know that these sites accept solid waste for land disposal. So we'll start kind of as a big picture overview for now, and then we'll dive into more specifics here shortly. But the regulations for active landfills are found in Title 27. So Article 1 contains standards on operating criteria. Article 2 covers daily cover and beneficial reuse of solid waste. Article 3 contains regulation on handling and storage of materials, equipment, and maintenance. Article 4 contains standards on controlling or minimizing leachate, dust, vectors, birds, litter, etc. And then Article 6 covers the requirements of gas monitoring networks, perimeter monitoring, etc. So again, we'll dive into that a little bit more later on. Another facility or operation type that we're going to talk about are transfer processing sites. And these are facilities or operations that receive, temporarily store, handle, recover, transfer, or otherwise process solid waste. These operations or facilities can also transfer the solid waste directly from smaller to larger vehicles for transport or be utilized for transformation. These facilities are categorized by the type and volume of material accepted. The regulations for transfer processing sites are found in Title 14. And these articles contain regulation that cover general design requirements and siting, operating standards for both operations and facilities. So things like dust control, hazardous waste, noise control, litter control, etc. Article 6.3 covers record keeping requirements. And then Article 6.35 contains some additional operating requirements for facilities only. So things like communication equipment, site security, site attendance. Compostable materials handling operations and facilities are permitted by the type of feedstock they accept and the volume of material that is accepted. And the regulations for these sites establish standards and regulatory requirements for both intentional and inadvertent composting resulting from handling of compostable materials. So things like feedstocks, compost, chip and ground materials, etc. The regulations for composting sites are also found in Title 14, and you might be starting to see a pattern here. So the articles are containing regulations on siting and design, operating standards, site records. Composting sites, though, do have specific articles that contain standards on environmental health standards that cover things such as maximum acceptable metal concentrations in compost and pathogen reduction. There is an article on composting facility site restoration. We're not going to cover that in today's training, but it is there if you are interested. And then the last type of solid waste site that we'll cover today are in-vessel digestion operations and facilities. And these are sites that receive solid waste for the purpose of digestion in an in-vessel digester, which is a sealed container or a sealed structure in which the entire digestion process occurs. So as we've seen in the sites before, the permit depends on the quantity of material processed and the type of feedstock being received. And the regulations for these sites can be found in Title 14 as well. And the articles reference siting and design, operating standards, record keeping requirements, additional operating requirements for facilities only, just as we saw with transfer processing sites. And then also for in-vessel digestion sites, there is an article to cover digestate handling standards. And these include standards on maximum acceptable metal concentrations and pathogen reduction and compost produced at these sites. All right, so we have another poll for you, poll number 2. Which facility type is most common in your jurisdiction? Do you have mostly disposal sites, transfer processing sites, compostable materials handling sites, or in-vessel digestion sites, or other? I know a lot of folks have closed landfills in their jurisdictions, and we're not going to be covering closed landfills today, but just wanted to give you the option to put that in there. So right off the bat, I'm seeing most of you are have transfer processing sites as the most common type of facility in your jurisdiction, which does not surprise me. That's what we've been seeing in all the trainings, actually. Some folks have disposal sites as their most common site, and then some compostable materials handling, and one other. So I'm assuming that's going to be a closed landfill, but yeah, so we'll be definitely covering standards that are required of transfer processing sites. We're not going to dive too much into like specifics as far as like tonnage and handling and whatnot, but we will talk about it. And we do plan to do some training specific to these sites in more detail later on. So we will have that at some point, but for today, we're just going to be scratching the surface. So perfect. Thanks, Cordero, for launching that for us. Oops, I just shared the results again, I believe. There we go. Okay. All right, so now that we have a top level understanding of state minimum standards, let's begin to dive into some specifics for state minimum standards. So standards can generally be organized by category. For purposes of this training, that's what we're going to be doing, even though this is not necessarily the way that they're organized in regulation. So for today, again, we're going to be focusing on standards that can be placed into the following categories. So we'll be focusing on operations, so processes and equipment that are required for operations, such as signs, site security, and roads. We'll be talking about controls, so minimizing or controlling nuisances, litter, odor, dust, leachate, noise, traffic, etc. We'll talk a little bit about supervision, so monitoring and support requirements. We'll talk a bit about handling and storage, so how to handle materials, salvaging and scavenging, and the removal and storage of materials. And then we'll also real briefly talk about record keeping and reporting, so keeping records of incidents, sampling, training, etc. So let's start with standards relating to operating criteria. It is important to note that we cannot cover the exact language in regulation for each facility type, otherwise we'd be here all day long. So we will be focusing on the general themes of the regulation that apply to all solid waste sites. All right, so one of the first standards you're going to assess as you drive up to a site is signs or signage. And the standard includes specific requirements for what needs to be on a sign or signs. So I know this was mentioned in the annotate activity that we did earlier, where this is an example of a prescriptive standard because it's requiring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 requirements, right? So for example, transfer processing sites require that the sign includes the name of the operator's telephone number, a schedule of charges, the hours of operation, and a list of the general types of materials that will either be accepted or not accepted. And then for signs, the requirements are going to be specific to whether or not the facility is open to the public or not. So for sites that are open to the public, there should be an easily visible sign at the entrance or point of access to the site. And landfills are also required to have visible road signs or traffic control measures that direct traffic to areas where waste will be deposited. And then for sites that are not open to the public, there needs to be a sign that is posted indicating the operation or facility name, and then also a location of the nearest public operation or facility. So here we have a couple photos of some signs. So the one on the left, although there are some blacked out information, that's not how the sign actually is in person. We just blocked that out for just to block out the information of the facility, so you don't have facility specific information there. But moral of the story here is that this sign has all of the required information, right? We have the operator's name, telephone number, hours of operation, the acceptable and non-acceptable materials, and the schedule of the pricing there. So all that information is there. The sign is legible, it's not been faded, and it's large and it's clear. And then the sign on the right, even though it might have the required information, it is blocked by some snow, right? So that sign is an example of one that might have the required information, but it's not necessarily legible or visible because it's being obstructed. So things to look for, again, is making sure that signs are legible from the public entrance and not faded. And also look for information that is up to date, right? So things are going to change, but if information does change, that it needs to be reflected on the signs as well. So this is another example of, or this is an example of a standard that has a couple different components, right? So we have those prescriptive components where it's requiring A, B, C, D, and E pieces of information, but it's also requiring that the sign is visible, right? So in order to be in compliance with that standard, all of those components need to be met. All right, so as you inspect a site, you should also look at site security. So sites must remain secure and prevent unauthorized human, vehicle, and animal access by use of a perimeter barrier or a topographic constraint. Additionally, areas within landfills with open storage or ponding of hazardous materials should be separately fenced or secured. So these photos show sites with fences and barriers. And again, this is another standard where it's a two-parter. So it's meeting the first portion of the standard, which requires that the site has a perimeter barrier or a topographic constraint, right? All these photos here are facilities that have those fences in place. However, the standard did say that the operators are required to maintain those fences to prevent unauthorized access, right? So all of these photos here are showing perimeter fences with holes. So that's not going to be preventing access by people, vehicles, or animals. And therefore, it would fail that second portion of the state minimum standard. So that standard would not be in compliance for these sites here. So as far as maintenance, roads, and equipment go, you should be looking for any issues regarding the state of equipment and site maintenance. And the site should be maintained in a good state of repair, and the operator should be implementing a preventative maintenance program to monitor and promptly repair deteriorated or defective conditions. Any on-site roads or driveways should be designed and maintained to minimize the generation of dust and tracking of soil onto adjacent public roads. We'll talk a little bit more about dust later on. And those roads should also be safe and maintained to allow vehicles reasonable all-weather access, obviously. And we'll talk about this more too in detail later, but there's going to be circumstances where weather, we get big storms where it's just unusual for the area. So, you know, there's going to be times where things just are out of our control, right? But those roads still need to be able to allow for reasonable all-weather access. All right, so some things that you can keep an eye out for in these photos, there's quite a few things. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to take a second to look at these photos here. We have a couple photos of on-site structures, and we have a couple photos of some roads. So based on what we just talked about, what are one thing or some things that you are noticing right off the bat that are not in a good state of repair and that would need some addressing? So go ahead and type in the chat. What are you noticing in these photos that the operator should be addressing? And what are some things that may not be in compliance or might be an area of concern here? Yeah, the roof is missing. Yes. Where did the roof go? We don't know. So yeah, the wall panels and the roofing are falling out. That's definitely a concern for safety, right? If you have pieces of structures that are falling on folks or jamming machinery, it's never a good thing. Soil track out, yeah. So we're seeing on the bottom left-hand photo, some soil tracking off the site onto the public roadways. That is definitely not in compliance with the standards. Building maintenance in general, yeah, deteriorated wall. And then on the top right-hand corner, somebody called this alligator roads or alligator skin or something to that effect, but we're seeing lots of cracking of the asphalt. Potential potholes there. And then once you get that dirt exposure, you're introducing more opportunity for that dust and that dirt to be tracked off site. So things like this are definitely things to keep an eye out for, and can always lead to further problems as well. So obviously some of these are probably worst case scenario, but you want to catch things before they get to this point, right? All right. Let's see where we have time. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about some controls. So control standards are performance standards. And remember that these standards require mitigation measures that minimize impacts, maintain, and allow for ongoing controls. When assessing compliance with these standards, a good starting point is to check the operating documents to determine if the operator is following the appropriate mitigation measures and if the measures are effective. So again, having those operating documents on hand to reference when you're on an inspection is super critical, and will definitely help you as far as determining compliance. So that's always kind of the rule of thumb, check the operating documents first. So some of the most violated control regulations are bird and vector control. Vector control regulations state that the operator should control, prevent, or minimize the propagation, harborage, or attraction of flies, rodents, or other vectors. I think the biggest question with this one is how many vectors are too many? Well, it's going to depend on a lot of factors, such as what type of vector it is. So, you know, with mosquitoes, you're looking at a small pothole of with a pond or a puddle of mosquitoes, or you're looking at a large pond of mosquitoes. You're looking at 1 coyote versus 10 coyote. Other things to consider are if vector issues are seasonal and if there have been any public complaints. If vectors are creating any hazards, such as a biohazard, any visibility issues or safety issues, then it's going to be a violation. And the standards for bird control are to minimize bird problems or attraction. And although it sounds simple, I'm sure many of you can attest that it's really not that simple, or not as simple as it sounds. So many of the same factors that are taken into consideration for enforcement of vector control should also be taken into consideration for bird control as well. So again, as we mentioned earlier, is the operator following the mitigation measures that are mentioned in their operating documents? And the question again is how many birds is too many? Another thing to think about is timing. So birds are going to be gathering when they know the opportunity is there for them to get their beaks on, not their hands, their beaks or their wings, whatever, on a piece of food, right? So times such as the uncovering of tarps might be an opportunity for these birds to grab a bite. And that's where you might start seeing large number of birds in the area. So operators should be incorporating these timing issues in their control measures into their operating documents. Some other factors to consider is if the facility is located nearby an airport, or if the birds are causing any visibility issues when driving through the site. All right, so we've all seen the dancing balloon man. I don't know if he has an official name or not, but the dancing balloon guy. And then we've also seen a lot of sites, landfills in particular, that use falcons as bird deterrents. But I want to take a minute here to talk about some other effective bird control measures that your operators have used or that you've seen used at sites. So this is a text annotate opportunity. So again, if you need to pull up your toolbar, it should be in that little green circle on the bottom, or you can type it in the chat. What are some effective bird control measures that your operators have used or you've seen used in the field? Let's see, we've got falcons. Yes, falcons, drones. I've seen that one more and more lately. And I think a lot of that is because drones are becoming more and more affordable, right? It's easy. Most people could operate a drone, so that's something that anybody can do. You don't need a specific falconer who's like trained in that field and has this special relationship with these birds, although it's amazing. Drones are just accessible. Cannons, yeah, so like noise deterrents, cannons, trying to think of what they were called in other trainings here, but yeah, any sort of noise deterrent, word cannons, hawks, yes, screamers, yes, thank you, screamers, cannons, propane cannon, I haven't heard of that one. I'm assuming it's, again, just making a loud noise to scare the birds off, right? And then I do see there's a question here. I'm gonna save that question. Yeah, so there was a question, I think it might have gotten sent to me directly about what specific code sections are those standards. And I don't have those linked, but what you can do is use that PDF to search for terms if you're looking for a specific section. So like, for example, bird control, if you type in bird, that should bring you to the different sections there. So yeah, unfortunately I don't have that for you there, but hopefully that helps a little bit. So yeah, so somebody said, Richard said that the propane cannons work, but residents complain of the noise generated by the cannon. Yeah, that's where it starts to become a problem, right? It's like, oh man, this is a great effective tool. But it also could cause some problems with some other issues like noise, especially when you're at a site where you have populations or sensitive receptors in the vicinity of that facility, right? So although it may be effective, it might lead to other problems, which might mean it's just not feasible. So yeah, definitely things to think about. So yeah, noise deterrence may not be super a great option if you have a facility nearby some neighborhoods or other sensitive receptors. So definitely things to keep in mind. Bird reflector streamers. Yeah, that was definitely one I saw last time too, the last training. And I use it personally in my garden. Nobody uses CDs anymore. So I have a couple CDs strung up on some twine and just they spin in the wind and I don't have any problems with the birds. It's great. And then Rachel was able to post the section for vector and bird control. And I believe that might be for transfer processing. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Perfect. All right, Cordero, let's go ahead and clear the slide. So moving on from vectors and birds, dust is something else that should be minimized at sites. Regulations for transfer processing and vessel digestion sites provide more specific guidance or requirements on what may indicate excessive dust. So things like safety hazards due to obscured visibility, irritation of the eyes, hampered breathing, and migration of dust off site. The regulations for landfills and compostable materials handling sites are simpler and state that the site should minimize the creation of transportation of dust. So that's going to be up to you to determine what, at what point are those is that dust becoming excessive? So measures to control, oh my goodness, measures to control dust include reducing processing, periodic sweeping and cleaning, misting systems, or ventilation control. You can determine if these or other control measures are not working if you observe dust accumulating on or off site. So look for dust accumulation on stairs and handrails. Look for dusty conditions within buildings or on-site structures. And then definitely make sure to observe areas where folks are working, right? We don't want to have inhalation problems there. So make sure that those buildings are clear of dust there. And then making sure that there's minimal dust in areas where public is offloading waste or on public roads offsite as well. So traffic flow into, on, and out of the site should have minimal interference with traffic on adjacent public streets or roads, and the operator should control on-site safety hazards and interference with site operations. I got a video for you. Nope, this is a photo. Video's next. So here, look to see if there are barriers such as K-rails or gates and signs to prevent the public from going into areas that are off limits to the public. Look to see if there's a traffic spotter present, and if the operating documents state that there should be one, make sure that they're doing their job effectively. You might need to watch for vehicle traffic preventing on-site equipment from carrying out their jobs. Look for piles of material that are restricting traffic, and then vehicles blocking the flow of traffic into the streets adjacent to the site. I know that's a big one. So here's the video. I'm going to play this for you. So here in a second, you're going to notice that there are a number of trucks here that are starting to accumulate and back up. And you see that there was a vehicle there, a piece of machinery that was working. With this many trucks, you're starting to have the potential of a disruption in those operating vehicles being able to maneuver. And then the other thing that you may have noticed is that there was no spotter here, especially with a larger volume of trucks on site. There definitely should be a spotter, making sure that traffic is going where it should and making sure that operating employees and vehicles are safe. Another thing to look for is noise control. So noise should be controlled to prevent health hazards and nuisance to nearby residents. Some measures to control noise include enclosures to reduce noise transmission and altering operating hours. Compliance with the standard should be met if the operator is following the design and operational procedures, but you can always inspect areas offsite to check noise levels and determine if they're being controlled. All right. Whoops, got one more poll for the third poll for you here. Before we jump over to our next control measure, what was the most commonly violated state minimum standard at landfills in 2022? And the reason I have 2022 specifically is because that was the latest year of data I had at the time of development. So that's why we're limited here. But what was the most commonly violated state minimum standard at landfills in 2022? So some folks are saying ADC, alternative daily cover, dust control, or they're probably about tied here, but most folks are saying litter control. And yes, that is correct. Litter control was the most commonly violated state minimum standard at landfills in 2022. And obviously litter is a big issue at sites, especially landfills. So regulations state litter should be controlled and routinely collected to prevent safety hazards, nuisance, and offsite migration. And we all know litter is going to happen, but how much is too much and when is accumulation too long? Well, it's gonna, again, depend on if the operator is following the control measures described in their operating documents, which may include routine litter pickup by foot. But once litter begins to blow off site, then it becomes a nuisance and potentially a hazard or environmental concern. So if you do notice litter off site, take a closer look to see if it's degraded or if it's covered in dust or foliage or cobwebs, spider webs, which may indicate that it's been there for a long time. You can also consider if the site is nearby a sensitive area, like a vernal pool or other water body, and make sure that litter is not accumulating in those areas. All right, leachate control. So regulation for landfills and compostable materials handling sites should control leachate to prevent contact with the public. And this is because the Regional Water Quality Control Board has full authority over leachate management. The regulations for transfer processing and vessel digestion sites provide more specific guidance on how to control leachate. So minimizing the creation of contact water, preventing contact water from migrating off site, and protecting public roads in general, structures, and public health. And ponding is usually related to maintenance issues such as potholes or low spots in roads or operating areas. So if you do find leachate, look for oily sheens and odors, especially because these can lead to other problems down the road, like, again, odor issues or vector harborage areas. So in general, the drainage and erosion control measures are written the same for leachate control. Operators should be minimizing contact water, preventing offsite migration, protecting roads, structures, and public health. And drainage and erosion issues are typically related to maintenance and weather events. So if a lack of maintenance in typical weather is causing problems, then you may need to reassess any control measures that are listed in the operating documents. However, unusual and extreme weather events that cause problems may not be cause for a violation so long as the operator addresses the problem in a timely manner. And unfortunately, more and more, it seems like these unusual and extreme weather events become more and more common. So just, you know, it's good to kind of keep that in mind, especially because if we are seeing these problems more often, operators are going to have to be dealing with the potential consequences. So being prepared is always a good thing to keep in mind. And then lastly, for control, we have nuisance control. Titles 14 and 27 state each operation or facility shall be operated and maintained to not create a public nuisance. So for Title 27, the regulations state that disposal sites should be operated and maintained not to create a public nuisance, which is defined in the California Penal Code. Public nuisance, again, is defined in the California Penal Code. Whereas other sites, so like transfer processing, composting, and vessel digestion sites, should be preventing the creations of a nuisance, which nuisance is defined within Title 14. So just wanted to point out that there's a slight difference in the definitions of the wording in the regulation and also the definitions of those terms, just to keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give you all about a 5-minute break here to go ahead and grab a bite to eat or something to drink real quick. Looks like we're at 10:16, so let's go ahead and reconvene back at 10:21. About 5-minute break here, and I'll see you back here at about 10:21. Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. We're going to go ahead and jump back into it. So we have covered operating, category of operating controls. We've talked about controls like litter and birds and leachate. So let's talk a little bit about supervision. There needs to be proper supervision and management on site for various reasons, such as safety and emergency response. So just as you wear personal protective equipment or PPE, site personnel should also be wearing and utilizing PPE. It is the employer's responsibility to provide PPE per OSHA. The site, however, should have an injury, illness, and prevention program or an IIPP on record. It is not your responsibility for enforcing the IIPP, but it is your responsibility to make sure that there is an IIPP on record. Emergency response measures are critical. Each facility should have adequate communication equipment available to site personnel to allow for quick response to emergencies. So look for spotters to be carrying radios so they're able to get a hold of somebody to deal with that emergency as quickly as possible. So each facility should also have fire suppression equipment continuously available, and it should be properly maintained and located as required by the local fire authorities. So can't tell you how many times I've seen photos of fire extinguishers looking like this, where it's covered in cobwebs and dust, and oftentimes even there's a pile of just stuff right in front of it. So clearly it's not accessible, but it also hasn't been maintained. So again, looking for unserviced fire extinguishers and clear access to fire suppression equipment. All right, so I've got one more video for you here. So again, a reminder that we are on the topic of supervision. I want you to take a look at this video and try to figure out what is missing here. So I can tell you the things that we do see are some birds, a lot of trucks, some offloading waste, some operating equipment, heavy equipment, potentially some misters there. You might have caught a glimpse of that, but what is something that is missing? Yeah, so we have no traffic control and we have no spotters. Right. So there we go. So any site, oops, missed a slide, I don't know what happened there. So yes, we need to have a spotter, right? So especially when there's a facility or an operation that has a lot of vehicle traffic, there needs to be a spotter making sure that that traffic is being directed, and then also that folks are staying safe. There was a photo or video or photo, I can't remember, that I saw where the truck driver was gonna off-haul some waste, exited the truck and was climbing into the trailer to who knows what, I don't know, maybe unjam something or whatnot, but definitely not a safe thing to be doing. So having a traffic spotter or just a safety spotter in general would help prevent that instance from occurring, and also any potential injuries from occurring as well. So any site that is open to the public should have a visible and accessible site attendant present during public operating hours. There should also be adequate supervision and a sufficient number of qualified personnel to ensure proper operation of the site. How do you know when or how many personnel is adequate? So look for things like if operations are backing up, especially due to like too many personnel on break at once, or if there's not enough personnel in general, then there's a problem, right? Operations need to be working and continuing to work without any interference. If you have those problems, then there needs to be likely more employees on site. Spotters should be doing their jobs effectively and should be watching for any safety concerns. And employees who are covering for a spotter on break should have experience in that area and should be trained in that role. So we'll talk a little bit more about training later on, but it is definitely important to have proper training for employees. All right, so the next category of standards we'll talk about is handling and storage. So this includes what type of waste can be accepted at facilities, salvaging of materials for use, and the storage and removal of waste. So load checking is a standard that is commonly in violation at sites. And the operator should be implementing a load checking program to prevent the acceptance of prohibited waste, and then also should be including the number of random load checks to be performed in their record keeping documents. There should be an isolated storage area for prohibited wastes that are removed during load checks, and all load checks should be recorded again in the training or in the record keeping logs. So first and foremost, how can you determine if load checking is occurring? Well, you can look for load checking records and determine if those load checks are being documented or if load checking is even occurring. So take a look at the records. Oh, great, there's load checking documents here. Chances are that it's actually occurring. If there's not documents there, okay, well, we're either looking at the documentation's not being done and or the load checking is not occurring in the first place. So a good way to determine if load checks are occurring is to look for waste that the facility does not accept. So like e-waste at a C&D site or treated wood waste or other hazardous waste. While at the site, watch the load checking process and observe how thorough that process is. Are the load checkers, are they kind of just like looking under a tarp real quick, saying, you're good? Or are they actually like walking around the vehicle, making sure that, the waste is acceptable or not? Are they watching the waste offloading process occurring from larger trucks and making sure that that waste is acceptable and not hazardous? Also make sure that there's a specific area for conducting a more extensive load check if any prohibited materials are suspected. And again, making sure that personnel training records are available. Again, we'll talk about record keeping a little bit later on, but record keeping is definitely critical, especially for load checking as far as employees are concerned. So in general, sites should not be accepting hazardous waste. So landfills must implement a program for detecting and preventing the disposal of hazardous waste. And transfer processing sites shall not accept or store hazardous waste. This includes things like batteries, oil, paint, wet paint, and special waste. If hazardous waste are discovered, control measures such as elimination or control of dust, fumes, vapors, or gases should be taken prior to the isolation of that material. Investment digestion sites should also be properly equipped to handle any liquid waste or sludge waste. All right, so site personnel shouldn't be the only ones familiar with identifying hazardous waste, because as an EA, you will need to be able to identify these wastes and determine when it is not being handled properly. So I have a little mini game here for you. I have a photo on the screen of a pile of C and D waste. So go ahead and take a second to take a look and type in the chat, what types of materials should not be here? What types of materials should not be in this pile of C and D waste? What are hazardous materials? So yeah, right off the bat, we're seeing solar panels, right? Are those solar panels? Oh yes, they are. They're large solar panels. So yeah, solar panels, which it makes sense as to why it ended up in this pile, demoing a building of sorts, and they just get tossed in the same bin. They are hazardous materials, though, that should have been identified right off the bat. So yes, solar waste, fluorescent lighting, if it's there, yeah. I thought I had seen some somewhere. potentially, maybe not. But yes, this is another instance where, okay, well, if we're seeing these solar panels, chances are there's going to be other materials in the area too, right? Fluorescent tubes, lighting tubes, treated wood waste, things like that, where if you're seeing one thing, you're probably going to suspect some other items as well. So yes, definitely things to look for. I also want to check the chat one more time. Treated wood waste, potential roofing, potential roofing felt. So things that might contain asbestos. Definitely something to look for, but also keeping in mind that when you are doing inspections, make sure you have your appropriate PPE, especially if you do suspect things like asbestos, right? You want to minimize your exposure to that. So just things to think about. But yes, absolutely, it's definitely a possibility. Great, I got one more photo for you here. This one might be a little easier. About the hazardous waste. So this is a public drop-off area, which might explain why we're seeing the items that we are seeing here. So what types of materials are hazardous and should not be in this pile? So yeah, the propane tank or whatever kind of gas tank it is, compressed gas tanks. Another solar panel, yeah, used oil, you got oil spill on the ground there. Paint, if there's wet paint in it, yeah. So paint cans with dried paint are not considered hazardous, but paint cans with wet paint are considered hazardous. So definitely something to take a look at. What else do we have here? What about some of the appliances? What about the appliances? Yeah, so the fridge and the oven, even potentially the oven. You know, these potentially have Freon in the fridge, for example. So these things should be isolated, and oftentimes they're going to have facilities or operations will have a separate e-waste area anyways. So yes, things to look for. And I want to say that's about all of the things. Oh, there's one more thing, and it's not super obvious. It is the potential for batteries. So, you know, you hear stories all the time about battery fires, right? So toys might have batteries. A lot of the times, I've got 2 young kids, so unfortunately I know this all too well, but toys have like, the batteries are now screwed into the toy. Like you have to go get a screwdriver, which is often a tiny little screwdriver that you have to find a specific size to get the batteries out, which is great for kid safety, but not so much for safety at a solid waste site, right? So chances are if you're seeing electronic toys and things like that, they're going to have batteries. So just things to keep in mind. Okay, so scavenging and salvaging. So scavenging meaning the uncontrolled or unauthorized removal of waste or recyclable materials is prohibited. However, salvaging or the controlled removal of waste materials for utilization is permitted as long as it does not interfere with other aspects of site operations. Obviously, things like drugs, cosmetics, food, beverages, medical waste, etc., should not be salvaged. Anything that might cause a hazard or be hazardous. Salvaging activities should be confined to specified, clearly identified areas and stored away from other activity areas. So one of the first questions to ask is if salvaged material is being stored properly and is it being removed regularly? Look to see how that material is being stored and if emergency vehicles can access those areas. So for example, you've got that photo on the top right there. It's hard to tell because you're looking at just one perspective in the photo here, but does not look like there's a whole lot of opportunity for vehicles to get in and out of there. So making sure that that material is being stored in a way that is allowing for operating vehicles to get in and out, but also emergency vehicles. Looking for, again, on that same photo, looking for things like ponding of water or vectors, things that are going to start to cause any nuisance issues. And then if green waste is being salvaged, keep an eye on the length of time that material is accumulated. Especially with green waste, there's potential for that material to one, start composting, which requires a composting permit, which depending on the site may or may not be in place, but also that material sitting too long could potentially cause fires. So it's also important to look for perimeter breaches, especially in sites that are nearby highly densely populated areas. You know, oftentimes folks are looking for somewhere to sleep, mattress, or any other useful recyclable materials that are right there in sight. So just definitely things to make sure that, you know, again, that safety is being considered, and then also that materials being stored properly, et cetera. So one of the newest and most cited regulations and inspections are organic waste recovery standards. And in general, operators shall be determining the quarterly percentage of organic waste contained in materials recovered and sent to landfill disposal. And we're not going to be going into detail on organic waste measurement protocols today, but we do have some recorded trainings available on our LEA training website, on CalRecycle's website. And we've also included some additional material in the resource documents. So again, those links are clickable in the PDF and are available on those resource documents if you're interested in learning more about organic waste handling. So at this point, we've covered a lot of statement of standards so far. We've talked a lot briefly about a whole lot of different standards. So let's take a moment to kind of utilize what we've learned so far and review. So here we have a photo, and there is a lot going on in this photo. So what compliance concerns can we find in this photo? So feel free to type in the chat. What are some things that are coming to your vision here, and what types of things might need some addressing? So yeah, right off the bat, we're seeing lots of birds. We're seeing litter, potential litter, ponding, security, yeah, ponding as in an actual pond. But yes, ponding of water, security. It looks like the fence might suddenly just continue, and then maybe there's a farm next door. So what's going on there? Neat lake, yes, the Great Lake. I called it a pond. I was trying to be nice, but you know, lake, pond. Yes, so there's a lot of problems here, right? And again, keeping in mind that this is one snapshot of one instance in time, and we can't see what's going on in the area where we can't see, right? But from what we can tell, it does not look like there's any bird control measures, and therefore we're seeing a large number of birds. We're seeing a lot of ponding of water, right? And then litter, yes. So we are seeing litter blowing across on that berm there. And then that is the result of potentially that the waste is not being covered, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about daily cover when the end of the operating day that waste should be covered. We don't know if this is the end of the operating day, the beginning of the operating day, but that's a lot of waste that is uncovered, which is, again, attracting the birds. So potential for litter. And then, yeah, what's going on with that perimeter fencing there? We have potential for unauthorized access, vehicles, persons, or animals, if that is not a complete perimeter barrier there. So yes, lots of things going on here. All right, one more. What types of issues are we seeing right off the bat here? And this is agricultural plastic that is being stored here. So we've talked about control measures, we've talked about storage of materials and handling of materials. What types of things are we noticing that might be a problem as far as compliance with the standard, or even a potential issue if any of the problems here are not addressed? I think that's what's most relevant. Yeah, so equipment and personnel safety. Yeah, so one, there's not really any room for operating to be occurring here. This material is stored really closely together and in large quantities where you can't get access from large machinery or even emergency vehicles. And then, yeah, leachate. definitely leachate. You know, these piles of material are stored so closely together that we're getting leachate, and we don't know if it's coming from the material. We don't know if there's something happening down the road that's causing this this accumulation of leachate. But yes, definitely a problem. And yes, odor. So you've likely this water or leachate has been sitting a while. Potential for odor problems, potential for vector problems. It looks like there's some sort of oily sheen, which is probably coming from that agricultural waste, but is there an oil leak somewhere? Which somebody had mentioned, are those 55-gallon drums has waste? Yeah, so those drums there potentially have some sort of oil, which is leaking into the leachate there. It definitely is worthwhile to take a second to kind of scope out the area once you see something like this, and you know, you've got a whole host of problems. Okay, I got this to look at. Like, where is this coming from? Is it coming from the drum, etc.? So there was one more thing I wanted to mention. Oh, and then as far as this material, it is agricultural plastics, and it is exposed to sunlight. So there's potential for that material to break down if it's not removed at a you know, required frequency. Can break down and start to be blown either around the site itself or even off site. So definitely want to make sure that that material is being moved and removed from the site at a regular frequency. Perfect. Alrighty, so as we touched on previously, operators are required to maintain records of various site operations. So let's go into some more detail very briefly. I'm going to kind of skim this section over just for the sake of time, but we're going to talk about kind of as a whole what's required from facilities, and then I'm not going to get too much into detail on what's required from certain facilities, but we do have the record keeping requirements handout for you available. It's kind of like a cheat sheet. So if you're, let's take a look at that, there's specific record keeping requirements for each type of facility that we have listed there. So that's available for you. But before we move into the general record keeping requirements, I'm going to have Cordero launch this poll for us. And this is our last poll for the day. In 2022, record keeping was found in violation most at which type of sites? Disposal sites, transfer processing, compostable materials, or in-vessel digestion. Again, 2022, the reasoning for that is because that was the latest year of data we had at the time. So which type of site was found in violation? And record keeping was found in violation most often at what type of site? So it looks like we have pretty much a tie between transfer processing and compostable materials handling sites. So the answer actually is transfer processing. So specifically section 17414. So records requiring documentation of incoming weights or volumes, outgoing weights or volumes, records being kept and accessible for the required amount of time, which is 3 years for transfer processing. We'll talk about that in a second. And then also operators submitting copies of specified records to the EA upon request or at a frequency approved by the EA. So yeah, those were all the big standout items where the record keeping was not quite in compliance with the requirements. And I can understand and I can see why a good number of folks said compostable materials handling sites. We'll talk a little bit about this, especially here shortly, the next activity, but compostable materials handling sites are required to keep record of a number of items. So we're looking at like metals, pathogens, physical contaminants, temperature monitoring. So there's a lot there too that needs to be kept on record keeping. So yes, there's a lot there. So I can understand why that was a highly voted upon option there. But as far as numbers go for 2022, transfer processing sites were definitely the takeaway there. So as far as record keeping goes, operators are required to keep several records available in record keeping logs. Here's a general list of the types of record that operators are required to keep for solid waste sites. So any sort of special occurrences like fires, injuries, accidents, public complaints, that one specifically, you want to make sure that's well documented. So making sure that information on the nature of the complaint and pertinent details, such as the date, complainant contact information, and any actions that were taken to respond to the complaint, make sure that's all in the record keeping logs. General information like the operator information, names, addresses, telephone numbers. Employee training log is absolutely critical. Recycling and disposal reporting system, RDRS requirements, EA approvals, determinations and requirements, organic recovery and disposal record keeping, and then also specific tests and reporting that's required for each specific site. So for like landfills, landfill gas monitoring, methane monitoring, and then for composting sites, tests results for metals, pathogens, physical contaminants. So for landfills, compostable materials handling sites, and vessel digestion sites, all records should be kept in one location and accessible for 5 years. And for transfer processing sites, those records are required to be kept on hand for 3 years. And again, any of these records should be sent to the EA upon request or at a frequency that has been approved by the EA. So a record of training for personnel assigned to the operation should be kept current, and training subjects should include things such as solid waste operations and maintenance, hazardous materials recognition, screening, use of mechanized equipment, environmental controls, emergency procedures, and any requirements for regulations that pertain to each specific type of facility. So the big thing for landfills is to make sure that landfill gas monitoring measurements are being recorded. For transfer processing, incoming weights and volumes needs to be recorded. And then for compostable materials and in-vessel digestion sites, for compost produced on those sites, test results for metals, pathogens, and physical contaminants, as well as temperature monitoring and pathogen reduction requirements should be also recorded as well. And then there's also some organic waste reporting requirements. Like, I'm going to skip over these ones for now, but those all are listed in that resource document that I've mentioned. Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and jump over to a breakout room activity. Now that we've covered general standards that do apply for all solid waste sites, now we're going to kind of start diving into facility-specific standards. So for the facility-specific standards section, we're going to be working in breakout rooms to create a slide. So each breakout room will be assigned a regulation, and you must work with your team to find the regulation in either Title 14 or 27, and then you're going to work together to put together a slide. So we're going to be doing this activity in Google Slides, so you can all hopefully edit the slides. We will be posting the assignments and the links to the slides in the chat momentarily. So once you are assigned a room, you should be able to access those links according to whichever room you are assigned. So basically, just like earlier, you're going to be prompted to join your room. You're going to introduce each other and choose a facilitator, and I will have these slides shared out to the breakout room on my end. Once you've done that, then you're going to go ahead and work with your team to create a slide. Each breakout room will have a CalRecycle staff member to help with any technical issues, and they will be sharing their screen in case any of you are unable to open the Google Slide document. Let's try to aim for like 10 minutes. I can give you a few extra minutes if there's some groups that need a little bit extra time. So let's do about 10 minutes, try to complete your slide, and then you're welcome to leave your breakout room once you are done with your slide. And then I will go ahead and send out a 2 and 1 minute warning as a broadcast, so it should pop up on the bottom of your screen once we get to that point. So here's the breakout room assignments. Some of the regulation sections are pretty long and have a lot of information, but each slide will have some guidance as to what to focus on for each topic. So try to stay within those parameters. And I do have a couple of extra slides on each Google document that I'll be talking about as far as just additional information that I wanted to share with the group. So for breakout room 1, you're gonna be covering spreading and compacting. So what is that? How should it be done and how often? Breakout room 2 will be talking about daily cover. What is it and how frequently should it be applied? Breakout room 3, intermediate cover. What is intermediate cover? How much and how frequently should it be applied? Breakout room 4, we'll be talking about landfill gas, specifically what are the landfill gas concentration thresholds. And then those are all facilities specific to landfills. So breakout rooms 5 and 6 will be focusing on compostable materials and in-vessel digestion. I just want to point out that prescriptively, the standards for maximum acceptable pathogen concentrations and physical contaminant limits are the same for both the composting and the vessel digestion regulations. And I've included links to both, but you are welcome to just focus on one, again, because those are prescriptively the same standards. So I provided them there in case you wanted to reference them, but just focus on one. So breakout room 5 will be talking about maximum acceptable pathogen concentrations. So what are those limits at, oh yes, what are those limits? And then breakout room 6 will be focusing on physical contamination limits. So what are those limits at compost produced at composting sites or in vessel digestion sites? Alrighty, so at this point, we are going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. So feel free to join your room. We will be posting the links in the chat. Once you are in your room, go ahead and open up your link. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for the first couple slides, and then I'll pass it over to the rooms to take over. I think we should have everybody back here in the main training room. Welcome back. So now that you've all had the opportunity to work in your groups to create your slides, we're going to go ahead and do a group report out. So facilitators, room facilitators, be ready to talk about your slide. And then the Power Cycle moderators will be sharing your slides. So we're going to go ahead and start with breakout room 1, which was compacting and compacting and something. I should know this by now. This is a lot of training. Spreading and compacting. There we go. So take it away, breakout group 1.
Okay, I guess that would be me. This is Maria Ferdinand with Monterey County. We had spreading and compacting and had 2 questions. What is spreading and compacting and how should it be done and how often? So for the first question, what is spreading and compacting pursuant to Title 27 CCR 2640? Solid waste shall be spread and compacted in layers with repeated passages of the landfill equipment to minimize voids within the cell and maximize compaction. How it should be done. The loose layer shall not exceed a depth of approximately 2 feet before compaction. How often? Spreading and compacting shall be accomplished as rapidly as practicable and done safely, unless otherwise approved by the enforcement agency. And as a note, daily cover should be completed by the end of the day and done safely. Also, just to be clear, spreading and compacting the waste is separate from it's a separate thing from the daily cover application. And that's it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Maria. And breakout room 1. And yes, you bring up a great point. The spreading and compacting is its own section. And daily cover is in its own section as well. So we'll do, I think daily cover is the next group. But before we jump over to them, I do have a couple of photos I wanted to share with you real quick. So how do you know if spreading and compacting is occurring? And how do you know if it's being done properly? Well, you might be lucky and pull up to the site when, or the active phase as that's occurring, but chances are you'll probably have to spend some time watching the active phase to see if the standards are being met. You can watch from a closed area of the landfill if that's available to you, so that personnel don't know you're watching. That's always an option. Some things to look for are intact materials, especially after personnel have left for the day at the end of the operating day. That would indicate that spreading and compacting has not occurred. You can also look for dozer or other equipment tracks on the waste, which would indicate that compacting has occurred. So looking for those equipment tracks and making sure that you know, that waste is compacted at the end of the day. Perfect. Thanks so much, breakout room 1. We're going to jump over to breakout room 2, which is daily cover. And go ahead, whoever was our facilitator for breakout room 2.
Okay. So daily cover, what is daily cover? How much and how frequently should it be applied? We looked it up in the regs, and we found that a minimum of 6 inches of compacted earthen material at the end of each operating day, or at more frequent intervals if necessary, to control vectors, fires, odors, blowing litter, and scavenging.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, that one's a pretty straightforward one, right? And I like that you guys included the at more frequent intervals if necessary to control vectors, fires, odors, blowing litter, and scavenging. So again, this is where you're able to use your implementation tools like the permits, terms and conditions, et cetera, in order to implement more standards or requirements that are more stringent than what's listed in the standards. So that's always an option. Melissa, could you go to the next slide real quick? I do have a couple extra things I wanted to chat about. There are allowances for daily cover materials other than compacted earthen material, which is referenced or referred to as ADC or alternative daily cover. All types of ADC must be approved by you, the EA, in writing prior to use. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the 11 approved ADC material types per Title 27 CCR 2690. The use of any of these 11 approved material types do not require a site-specific demonstration project. And this section also prescribes the required depth for each of these material types. And then next slide for a couple photos. So things to look for is if the operator is using the appropriate cover material as it's described in the operating documents. Look to make sure that the daily cover or ADC is in place and by the end of the day, and that it's still in place and effective by the next morning before operations begin. You can look for any loose waste and unraveled covers, and if tarps are being used, make sure that there's no tears or holes. All right, thank you so much, breakout room 2. We're going to jump over to intermediate cover with breakout room 3.
Okay. Okay. So for us, it was what is intermediate cover, how much and how frequently should it be applied? Intermediate cover is compacted earthen material of at least 12 inches and shall be placed on all surfaces of the fill where no additional solid waste will be deposited within 180 days to control vector, fires, odors, blowing litters, and scavenging.
Yes, perfect. Thanks so much. And that's another fairly straightforward one as far as the questions that were on the slide there. If you could flip to the next slide, I do have another photo for you. Especially in these areas where you know, waste is not going to be deposited within 180 days and requiring intermediate cover. Looking for any exposed waste through the intermediate cover will indicate, one, there's potential that it wasn't applied thick enough in the first place, or two, that it might actually require more just based on a number of factors. Every site's going to be slightly different, and operations are going to be slightly different per site, just based on equipment that's available or whatnot. But you know, things to look for. And I think I had come up in a previous training, what happens after 180 days. Well, it's going to depend on what that area is going to be used for next, right? If no additional waste is going to be applied, then another round of intermediate cover is going to be required. But if waste is going to be deposited there again on a more frequent basis, then it's going to kind of revert back to that daily cover, right? So it's kind of just depends on what's next for that area. All right, perfect. Thanks so much, breakout room 3. We're going to jump over to breakout room 4 with landfill gas.
Okay, so in section, so under Article 6, 27 CCR 20921 is where you find subsection A is primarily what I would look for initially, because that's quantifies your 1.25%, your 5% threshold limits, and then also mentions trace gases. And then subsection B has EA filing requirements and CIWMB concurrence, timeline requirements. Let me jump back over to, let me just cover that real quick. The concentration of methane gas must not exceed 1.25% by volume in air with any portion of any on-site structures, and then the concentration from the disposal site migrating from the disposal site must not exceed 5% by volume in air at the disposal site permitted facility boundary, and then trace gases. And so with trace gases, we had to kind of navigate out and back to specific definitions, and then we pasted in the text there for the specific definitions. And then the other thing we talked about was that if that did not address a certain question regarding whether a trace gas is subject or not subject to control measure requirements, then we would reach out to CalRecycle staff for support on that. Is there anything I missed, Kathy, or Rachel?
No, this looks,
No.
this looks
Okay.
really good.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Help me out if I missed anything. Okay.
No, it looks great.
Okay.
You guys actually probably were the more detailed of all the groups I had for this one. So this is great. Thank you so much. And
Yes,
I will be, I can't quite tell if you said that was a link in there or not. My screen's super tiny right now, but I will be sharing these with you via email so you can access them after the training today. So if you'd like to take a look at these, those will be available for you. So thanks, Mark. Rachel, could you go to the next slide for me, please? Yeah, so it's critical to monitor methane and other gases that result from the decomp of organic waste for obvious reasons, but being that buildup of these gases can be explosive at certain concentrations. Landfill gas monitoring standards lay out engineering requirements such as the gas monitoring control program, location and depth of monitoring probes, spacing and construction of monitoring wells, as well as the regulations also describe monitoring parameters and frequencies and how monitoring results should be reported to the EA and what to do when landfill gas exceeds landfill gas concentrations.
I almost I'm sorry. I kicked back on the mic because I almost forgot to mention at the very bottom of 20921. I thought it was interesting because C, D, E, and F give you some give the EA some important regulatory control provisions there as far as how long the gas monitoring and control plan shall be continued after the landfill ceases to operate, right? Operator has to submit in writing a request to discontinue, all those things like that. So it's I never really noticed it before. So so I just wanted to give mention to those parts as well down towards the bottom there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I had you guys kind of skip over that stuff, but I'm glad you noticed it because that's the cool thing about diving into these regs when you're forced to because I'm telling you to or asking you to, but you're probably noticing things you didn't notice before, right? So you're almost becoming a little like almost subject matter experts on these topics now. But yeah, Mark brings up a great point, and that actually kind of leads nicely into our next slide here, where if you ever have questions about the requirements, especially more on the engineering side, we do have the opportunity for you to reach out to our CalRecycle engineers. They're always available to assist with landfill gas monitoring documents and any questions as needed. If you're not familiar with who your point of contact is, we do have the LEA Central CalRecycle contacts available. So if you click on that, you're able to filter through and look for your specific contact for your jurisdiction. And then as far as equipment goes, we Color Cycle does offer an equipment rental program in which we loan out landfill gas monitoring instruments to you, the LEAs. Staff is able to provide technical support on loaned equipment, and we also can repair and calibrate LEA-owned equipment as well. So that's always an option. There's a link there that'll be available for you if you'd like to have some more information on that. Great, thanks so much, breakout room 4. We're gonna jump over to move away from landfill site-specific standards and move over to composting and vessel digestion. So I'll pass it over to breakout room 5. Actually, before I do that, I do have a couple slides I want to talk about real quick because I had you guys talk about or cover maximum metal concentrations, but I did want to talk about sampling and, or I'm sorry, you guys covered acceptable pathogen concentrations. I wanted to cover sampling and metal concentrations before we get there. So environmental health standards require compost to be samples for metals, pathogens, and physical contaminants. And there's a requirement that the compliance with these standards is verified prior to the point where the compost is removed from the site or beneficially used on site. The regulations prescribe a method for obtaining a random and representative composite sample from compost windrows. So on the screen here is a diagram showing what is required as far as obtaining samples. So the protocol requires the operator to take 12 samples from 3 different depths, each at a different cross section. So essentially, if an operator is taking, again, at least 12 samples, although they're welcome to take more, they would be required to cut out 4 different spots within the windrow. And visually, we're only able to see 2 of those cutouts here on one side of the windrow. And within each of those cutouts, the operator should be taking a sample from 1 of 3 depths. So that red is 1/2 the width of the windrow, green is 1/4 the width of the windrow, and then blue is 1/8 the width of the windrow. So doing this 4 different times will allow for a composite sample of at least 12 samples, mini samples, to create 1 composite sample. Operators should be sampling for environmental health standards every 5,000 cubic yards of compost produced. And if sites produce less than that, then they should be sampling at least once every 12 months. Next slide, please. And then once a sample is taken, it must be sent to a California Department of Public Health certified laboratory, so a CDPH certified laboratory. Compost shall not contain metals in excess of the concentrations listed here on the slide. You may note that there is no maximum concentration for chromium, but it still should be measured and recorded. So now that we've covered those, I'll go ahead and pass it over to our breakout room 5 facilitator to talk about maximum acceptable pathogen concentrations.
Thank you. Yeah, so we were assigned what are the maximum acceptable pathogen concentrations in compost. We found that in section 178.68.3, pathogen reduction. And the density of fecal coliform compost that is or has at one time been active compost shall be less than 1,000 most probable number per gram of total solids dry weight basis. And the density of Salmonella bacteria in compost shall weigh less than 3 most probable number per 4 grams of solid waste, dry weight basis. So that's what we found in that section.
Perfect. Yep, that's it. So that's, again, we're looking at specific thresholds, specific quantities. So prescriptive standards, if an operator or a site is not meeting these concentrations or is in excess, then they're not in compliance with that standard. Next slide, Dana. So how must pathogen reduction occur in compost windrows? For windrow composting, this has the longest pathogen reduction period, where active compost should be maintained at a temperature of 131 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for a period of at least 15 days. And then windrows should be turned at least 5 times during that period. Temperatures readings should be taken every 150 feet to 200 cubic yards of compost for each day of pathogen reduction. So once every 15 days or however long the pathogen reduction is occurring. And that should be taken at least 12 to 24 inches below the windrow surface. Next slide. And then for aerated static pile composting process, all active compost shall be covered with 6 to 12 inches of insulating material. And again, the active compost shall be maintained at a temperature of 131 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for 3 days for pathogen reduction. And again, temperature should be taken once every day, 150 feet to 200 cubic yards of compost. And then the temperature should be taken 12 to 18 inches below the point at which the insulation meets the active compost. So if the operator is using 6 inches of insulating material, then that temperature probe should be down to at least 18 inches within the entire pile itself. So again, taking that temperature in the active compost, trying to avoid that insulating layer. All right. Thank you so much, breakout room 5. We have one more breakout room 6, and they covered physical contamination limits for us. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to breakout room 6.
Okay, so physical contamination limits, we were told to look up at the regulations in the compost. This, in addition to visual observation of the compost, the operator is also required to do the physical contaminant limit testing in the lab. The regulations state compost shall not contain more than 0.5% by dry weight of physical contaminants greater than 4 millimeters. I think that's the most crucial point, is that 4 millimeters limit. And then there is another condition there that states no more than 20% by dry weight of this 0.5% shall be film plastic greater than 4 millimeters. And if the compost material contains in excess of this limit, then they should be designated for additional processing, or they should be disposed accordingly. So that's the main requirement in the physical contamination limits. And the second thing, as you had pointed out, if the sampling has to be done for every 5,000 cubic yards of material generated, and if it's less than 5,000 cubic yards in a 12-month period, then they have to sample it once.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Thanks so much, breakout room 6. And then just real quick, as far as meeting this standard, one option is, well, for finer compost material, oftentimes operators are just going to take that composite sample and send it to a lab for analysis. However, for coarser materials, it is an option for operators to use the FIM method, or the field indicator method. I have a link in the resource document if you're interested. And that allows for operators to estimate physical contamination limits in coarser materials out in the field. So I'm not going to have too much time to cover that. So just something to look into if you're interested. Next slide, I do want to talk about compost fires and odors real quick, since we're on the topic of compost. And by the way, I love the little worm. It's very cute. Compost fires are a common issue at composting facilities. And in order to prevent fires, the operator should be monitoring the temperature of compost windrows and piles. They should be stocking adequate water supply for fire suppression, and isolating any potential ignition sources from combustible materials. And although that's required of the operator, you are always, as an EA, able to take a probe with you and stick it in a windrow and see where they're at. That's going to help you determine if they're meeting their pathogen reduction requirements, along with the testing results for the environmental health standards. Good composting practice leads to good fire prevention. So things like adequate moisture, good feedstock mix, regular movement of materials, and doing like a first in, first out inventory control. So moving material along kind of like an assembly line order, right? Next slide, please. And as far as odors go, LEAs do have jurisdiction over odor complaints for compostable material handling facilities, while air districts have jurisdiction over all other sites. Odors are one of the most commonly cited violations at composting sites, and handling activities at these sites should be conducted in a manner to minimize odor impacts and not to cause a nuisance. So composting sites are required to have an odor impact minimization plan, or an OIMP, which is an operations plan on how the operator will minimize odors at their facility. If you find that the OIMP is being followed, but there's still some chronic odor impacts that are occurring, then the operator should, one, revise their OIMP, but they're also, you're also welcome or able to require the operator to do a best management practices feasibility report, which is basically just a tool that allows for the operator to assess their current best management practices and make any operational changes to help further minimize odors. All right, thanks so much, breakout room 6. All righty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again here. Just give me 1 second. So we've talked now about general state minimum standards that apply to all types of facilities. So we talked about facility specific standards, and let's talk a little bit about enforcement. Oops. There we go. All right, so the objectives for site compliance with state minimum standards are to obtain consistent long-term compliance and to ensure that solid waste operations are not creating a threat to public health and the environment. And these objectives can be met by being proactive in that you provide operators ongoing education and establish a clear mutual understanding of the expectations that are laid out in the standards. It's also important to be consistent day to day and site to site, and also to document and communicate clear, complete, and evidence-based inspection reporting that includes detailed description of compliance issues, photos, regulation citations, and history of compliance. Obviously, nobody wants to go take enforcement to the higher levels where you might have to go to court, but if it ever gets to that point, documentation is critical. Inspection notes are useful to include in inspection reports. You can use notes to document unusual occurrences, any upcoming deadlines. You can use these to record measurements that you took, for example, like temperatures at the windrows or any landfill gas measurements. And some EAs may even use these notes to document positive instances. So for example, if there has been some compliance issues or an operator's been hitting an area, has had a couple area concerns for a specific standard, and then they were able to implement some sort of new control method or able to get whatever the issue was under control. Being able to say, oh, operator was having problems with this, they tried this and it's working great. So just being able to kind of help document and develop that track of compliance history is super critical and helpful. So how do we enforce standards? Through the issuance of areas of concern and violations. So for an area of concern, the operator is in compliance, but the observed problem could become a violation if it's not addressed. A violation occurs when a state minimum standard is not being met. So there's many factors that can play into determining compliance versus non-compliance, but you're gonna have to evaluate the situation and determine if the current conditions that you are observing demonstrate compliance or non-compliance. So violations for prescriptive standards are fairly straightforward. If the standard's not met, then the EA should be issuing a violation. So again, this landfill gas well is measuring at 6% methane. That's over that 5% limit, violation. However, issuing violations for performance standards is a bit more involved. It may require some further investigation. Important questions to ask are, what steps is the operator taking to address the issue? Are they implementing the control measures as described in their operating documents? And is the issue causing an immediate problem, especially in regards to public health and safety and environment? All right, so you found a non-compliant standard, now what? Time to document it in the inspection report. So it's important to be thorough when noting a violation in the inspection report, and you should explain what the regulation requires. You can just simply copy paste from the regulations, and then you should also describe what you observed and with as much detail as possible. So make sure to include times and conversations that were had with site personnel. dates, etc. Photos are always great, especially when they're timestamped. Very helpful. So what happens when a site keeps violating the same standard? Well, a couple things. You'll likely need to start enforcement consistent with your EPP plan. And we do have a training on that available in the resource document. But the other thing that happens is that the site will begin to be placed on the inventory. And the inventory is CalRecycle's list of solid waste facilities that are currently in violation of state minimum standards. The first step in a facility being placed on the inventory is that an LEA documents violation of the same standard on 2 consecutive monthly inspection reports. CalRecycle then sends a letter to the operator of the facility notifying them of CalRecycle's intent to place them on the inventory if the violations are not corrected within 90 days. And these letters are referenced as a notice of intent or an NOI. If that statement of standard has not been corrected by the 90th day, then CalRecycle will be sending another letter to the operator notifying them that their facility has been placed on the inventory, and these are referred to as inclusion letters. So after that, the site is listed on CalRecycle's website on the inventory. And then if not done so already, the EA should be commencing with enforcement consistent with the EPP plan. And then as far as getting removed from the inventory, the EA must provide CalRecycle with written documentation that the facility is no longer in violation with all of the standards or the one standard that is listed on the inclusion letter. And then CalRecycle will notify the operator within 15 days upon receipt of that documentation. All right, so I kind of flew through that one. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat and we can address those in the Q&A section. But the last thing we have for you today is an escape room, which is landfill themed. So in this activity, you'll be working as a breakout room team to work through a landfill themed escape room. The activity will be navigated by a CalRecycle moderator. And as a team, you will need to address and answer a series of questions to make it through a landfill inspection. You'll likely need to reference Title 27 regs, so go ahead and pull those up, have those handy. So for this one, again, just like the other breakout rooms, you're going to be joining your room once prompted. You're going to need to introduce each other and choose a facilitator. Your facilitator will basically just be helping to guide discussion and come up with a final answer for each question on behalf of the group. And you're going to work with your team to escape. So I do have a couple of discussion item question at the end. Let's go ahead and skip that because we are close to time. And we can just do a real quick report out when we get back into the main room. Just a note, let's see. So, and then once we get about half the rooms back into the main training room here, I'm going to give a 2-minute warning and I might have to cut you all off. I'm trying really hard not to, but I want to make sure we have time for questions. So, so just be prepared for those 2-minute warning and the 1-minute warning to come through your way. And then I think that's it. So again, skip the discussion question, come straight back to the room. And then when you are leaving your breakout room, be careful to not leave the meeting. I think it gives you a couple options. You can either return to the main training room or leave the meeting. So make sure you return to the main training room because we do have Q&A and I will be posting the link to the evaluation here as well. So Cordero is going to go ahead and open the rooms. So go ahead and join those. And CalRecycle moderators, be sure to share the 2 intro slide and the facilitator slide for me, please. Thank you. I was going to have you all talk amongst yourselves about this question, but obviously we ran out of time. So some of the things to think about as far as what recommendations you'd be making to the operator to address these issues. So for things like site security and scavenging, things like incorporating more security, so either additional personnel or cameras to help with that. Landfill gas monitoring can always require your operators to do more than what's required in the regs. So more frequent measurements and then training records, that one's kind of tricky because it's a matter of whether or not if the records are being kept, or if it's a matter of the training's not happening at all. So kind of, I think the biggest thing is one, communicating with your operator, looking more closely into the problem. Two, looking at the operating documents to see if the currently described BMPs are being, or control measures are being used, and if they're effective, and if not, requiring more control or more thorough control. So thank you all for participating in that. I'm hoping that you were able to get something out of it, had a little fun with it. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to our subject matter experts for Q&A. Cordero, if you could post a link to the evaluation in the chat. Again, that is required for CEUs. If you would like to receive CEUs and submit an evaluation anonymously, you can do 2 evaluations. Do one with just your contact information for the CEUs, and then another one without, and just to do the evaluation. So we have that too. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Randy. We have Randy, Justin, Lily, and Jared here available for questions. Cordero, do you have the list of questions? I know I just asked him to do a bunch of things at once, but what I can do is I'll start off with this question we just had in the chat. More of a what do you think type of question, but if a condition contravenes a state water resource control board violation as opposed to a cow recycle regulation, should it be recorded by the LEA on the inspection form or referred to the water board who has jurisdiction? So I think ultimately, if you're noticing something that's within the water board's jurisdiction, should that be noted on the inspection report and or referred to the water board who has jurisdiction there?
Hi, Carly and everybody. This is Randy Friedlander. I think I can field this question. We would, as EA, where our inspectors are inspecting sites, if we see a condition that's water board related, since we work so closely with them, we would definitely, depending on the severity of that condition, note it on an inspection report, send the water board folks a courtesy copy of our inspection report, and if it warrants some immediate action, definitely contact them quickly, maybe a phone call or an email. But sure, we would note those observations on a report and share that with the water board folks.
Perfect. Thanks, Randy. Cordero, do you have any other questions available? If not, no worries. I got one.
Yes, yeah, another one that I posted in chat. What are some examples of leachate control was asked?
Leachate control. Since most modern landfills are designed with Subtitle D liner systems, they usually are required to have a leachate control and removal system as part of that liner system. That would be one example of the control. Others would be if you see leachate seeps, pop outs at landfills, on slopes, etc. Controls could include anything like straw bales, straw wattles to control the flow of leachate, to keep it from coming in contact with the public, soil berms, lined leachate ponds to direct that leachate to a lined pond, controls to keep that leachate from flowing off site, especially into a storm drain system. We see a lot of absorbent type material, wood chips, we've seen those being used along with a soil berm to direct leachate seeps to a containment area. Also Baker tanks, vacuum trucks can collect leachate that's flowing. Other storage type equipment, stuff like that. There's quite a few different measures that landfill operators can take to control that flow of leachate.
Perfect. Cordero, were there any other questions that we had from earlier? If not, there's one more in the chat we can read.
The only other one that we had come in was about the cow recycle funding to help legacy sites to comply. We did have Julian post a link in the chat, but I'm not sure if there was more to add or any other questions on that.
Yeah, if Julian, if I'm not, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you would like to come on mic and share more about that, I will open the floor to you. If not, no worries, we can pass it over to the next question. I'll give you a second here.
Yeah, so just a quick little summary. The website of our program, the cleanup unit, we are part of the engineering supporting branch, and we offer 2 grants, legal disposal and legacy disposal site grant programs, and both grants are supposed to help the LEA just help address some of the issues at these sites, and therefore legacy disposal, so pre-regulated sites from prior to 1988. And that link is to the website. And if you have any questions, I am the person of contact who will be leading the new grant solicitation for this upcoming cycle. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Appreciate that. We do have one more question in the chat. That CalRecycle is available to provide servicing and calibrating of LEA-owned gas monitoring equipment. How do we inquire on this? So I can't exit my screen right now, but maybe Cordero might be able to pull that link up for me. If not, then I can always put it in the email we send out after the training today. But Randy, do you have anything that you can add in on that?
I would try reaching out to our health and safety program, who runs our field shop and our LEA equipment loan program, for possibly helping LEAs calibrate their equipment. I'm sure they could help out. I'm sure they're our in-house experts on our equipment, gas monitoring, and calibration.
Yes, and that link that we can provide will have that contact information there available for you. But again, I can include that specifically in the email that we send out. And then kind of on the same topic, there was a piece of equipment, an RKI Eagle, on loan since 2017, which is a bit old. So that would basically be the same contact person to arrange for return of that piece of equipment or exchange. So yeah, we'll be sure to get that information out to you all so you are able to get your equipment exchanged out and get more up to date, and then also learn more about what services we can provide for you. Any other questions? Alrighty, well, with that, we're going to go ahead and end the training for, one more. Do you have a list of certified labs that do composting, compost sampling besides soil control labs? So yeah, CalRecycle does not have a list of approved labs. However, if you were to go to US Composting Council, USCC website, I believe that they have a control of sampling labs within California, but also throughout the United States. But yeah, Soil Control Labs in Watsonville is one. It's been a minute since I've looked at that list. I know there was maybe 1 or 2 others in California, and I can't recall the names off the top of my head. It's been a few years, but yes, we don't. So basically, CalRecycle does not have that, but there is a list available. And Randy, is there anything else that you want to add in on that one?
No.
Okay. Perfect. Looks like Cordero was able to pull up that link, and I appreciate that because that was a spur of the moment thing. So thank you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end the training today. Thank you so much for all of you who were able to join us today, and thanks for sticking around a few extra minutes. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we will see you at the next event. Have a great day, everybody.